and welcome to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and we're very happy to have with us today a wonderful drummer and also a producer of several wonderful records, and with a very illustrious history and story, and one of my favorite people to hang out with, the great Mr. Bill Goodwin.
Hey, everybody. And hey, Bob.
Hey, Bill.
So how long have we known each other? It's been over 40 years.
It has. Yes, I remember.
I can't remember where.
I think we first got to, when you were playing with Phil Woods.
Yeah.
You guys were at Hoppers and I was at Sweet Basil.
Oh, Hoppers, okay.
And I remember that you guys used to come after your gig.
Yes.
And catch my band over at Sweet Basil.
Yep.
Which I was honored that you could even listen to another alto player after Phil.
Well, Phil was very fond of you, and I always thought you played beautiful. So, and Phil was extremely fond of you. I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And you know that when you play with Phil Woods, eventually you meet every alto sax player in the world.
You do.
They would all show up. And I remember you were already out playing and stuff, but I remember meeting Vincent Herring. We were playing at the Village Vanguard. And there was this young guy sitting in the front row, and everything he played, he was just wigging out, And then I met him. He was going to West Point at that time.
Really?
And and he just, and now, of course, he's become an extremely well-known and very fine alto player. It was so funny. He still talks about it. He just was blown away, man. Yeah, I guess we sounded pretty good. But Phil was, those days, man, geez, forget about it.
The band was on fire. I remember that. And
yeah.
I still can't play cheek to cheek.
Oh, yeah.
Without thinking of Phil's beautiful, his arrangements were wonderful too,
That wasn't his arrangement. That was Mike Malilla.
That was Mike Malilla's arrangement.
Yeah, so was Bye Bye Baby, and so was Sleeping Bee. So that might have been Phil's. But Mike was doing a lot of arranging for the group, and they were really, really special stuff. And he was actually, Phil's condition wasn't tip-top in those days all the time. Well, Mike took a lot of he was sort of like the musical director in a way. So, there's always like a struggle between those two because, Phil never liked to acknowledge, anybody else's contribution that much.
Yeah, I did hear a negative comment that Mike had been quoted, as saying about his struggles with Phil related to alcohol and abuse.
Yeah, it was well, he was not non-compos mentis, and AWOL, and Mike actually left the group for about 6 months. We were in Europe, and Phil was acting out so badly that we got thrown off an Italian airplane, if you can imagine that. And we had to get to the gig, and Mike just didn't come. He never made it to the gig. And so we got, you remember Nico Bunick, the pianist?
I knew Nico, who wanted to be called Floris.
Well, that was his real name, was Floris, yeah.
Right, but he really would get upset.
Yeah, because when he changed, he wanted everybody to adapt, like right away. And of course, we made jokes about it, Was there a florist there, But he was one of my best friends, man, from even the California days. We knew each other from the 60s. And he was just Nico then.
I knew him as Nico too in New York.
Yeah.
In the 60s, the late 60s as well.
Yeah, before he went back to Holland.
Right, and he changed his name because of numerology.
That's highly likely.
The numerologist told him that, his luck would change because he had been a little down on his luck if he would use his name Floris because it would change the numerology of his name. I remember he told me that.
Yeah.
And
after that, he died from brain cancer.
Really? Is that how he died?
Yeah, but it was 10 years later, 10 or 12 years later.
Well, he may have.
Anyway, he subbed for Mike at the Middelheim Festival. I'm sure you played that one.
I did in Belgium. I played there with Chet.
In Belgium, yeah. I think Chet was trying to remember. No, Chet wasn't on that one. Roswell Rudd was there, and who else? I can't remember. But we played for 3 hours. Flores sounded fucking great, man. Wonderful, wonderful piano player.
He
A
was
true bopper, a true bopper.
Yeah, and when I was doing my touring as a single a lot in Europe, Flores was responsible for some very good gigs. He would always have me tell him when I was going to be in Europe, and he'd always come up with a few gigs for me.
Yep.
And his wife, though, I remember one time, this was funny. We were playing in Holland. We were playing in Amsterdam at the Meervaart. A big kind of festival there.
Yeah.
And it was Chet's band and Ron Carter's group at the time. We were all at this, and afterwards, and Flores was playing there with somebody else.
Probably Wilbur Little on bass.
Yeah.
He used to play with Wilbur a lot.
He moved to Amsterdam around that time.
Yeah.
Which was funny because I felt that Wilbur, with his proclivities, when he said he was moving to Amsterdam, I went, oh no. I was thinking he's not going to last a long time.
He prospered there.
Was that?
He prospered there because of his citizenship, and plus, the whole family. They were extremely interesting, multilingual, people. I used to, stay with them sometimes at their loft in New York, and the dinner conversation would be in like 4 different languages.
Wow. So he married a Dutch woman then.
Yeah, she was originally from the Philippines, but she was Elena, was a lovely, lovely person.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm still in touch with his son, Percy, who looks exactly like him.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to work with Wilbur. Well, I played with him with Konitz, but I also was part of a trio with Duke Jordan.
Oh, nice.
Wilbur and me in the early 70s. We played at a club in New York called Churchill's.
I don't remember that joint.
It was one of those meat market bars on the East Side.
Okay.
They used to call the meat markets
sure.
Which is Gregory started out as being kind of a dating bar, this
sure.
kind of, and sometimes people would ignore the music, most of the time, but yet there we were, Duke Jordan on the electric piano of all things, and Wilbur on bass, and we had a wonderful, wonderful gig. It was a lot of fun.
He was he was the first bass player in Elvin Jones' trio, along with Joe Farrell when Elvin first got his trio, because I saw them on my first trip to London with Gary Burton in '69. They played the week right before us. And, Joe Farrell and
actually, he was the second bass player, because in 1968 there was a gig at Pookie's Pub.
That was Garrison. No, Wilbur Ware.
And that was Garrison.
Yeah.
That's where I met Jimmy. So he was really that was Elvin's first trio.
Yeah, but he was still playing with Train.
No, Train had died.
Oh, after Train. Okay. Well, I'm talking about.
Died on.
Train died in '67. That's right.
June 13th. Yeah, and
it's so funny because I still think he's with us.
You got to hear Train quite a bit in your.
I did quite a few times. Yeah. I never got to meet him, but I did meet Elvin and got to know him over the years, and we became not tight, but like road. We'd hang out on the road, and maybe have a drink or have some dinner or something, like you do when you're going to jazz festivals. And we were often on the same flights together.
Yeah,
so if I could, I would sit with him if I could. I used to do that with Art Blakey too.
Yeah, that's
try to sit with him if I could and just soak it up,
Yeah, I did that with Steve Lacy and.
Oh yeah.
And a few people. Whenever I saw Lacy, I'd gravitate to him or.
Oh yeah, man.
Jackie McLean. There were a few people you made sure
you make sure that you get a chance to be in the proximity. It's like you pick up so much from the conversation and just the presence of these people. I mean, that's I believe my sociability or my interest in musicians as people has added so much to my ability to play music with them.
Yeah, I would have to say the same thing. I mean, both of us have a similar nature that way, you know, just being curious how people became who they
Yeah.
are.
Mm-hmm.
And
That is a curious thing when you come right down to it. Why, why us? What did we do wrong? Like Phil used to get drunk and start complaining. He goes, "Why me, Lord? How much longer must I suffer?" I'm like, shut up, man. Sit down.
I feel like to do that. Ben Riley told me a story about Phil that was hilarious.
On the road with Monk?
Well, on the road. No, this was on the road when I think they were in Europe. They were in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't on the road with Monk, but they were on the road with I think a Quincy Jones situation or something like that.
Yeah. So what did Ben say?
Yeah. So they're in a restaurant, they're drinking, and Phil is, in his cups pretty well, and he sees a very Aryan-looking German, and it's about 1950, the early 50s, like 54.
Yeah.
Close enough to World War II.
Yeah.
You could assume that perhaps this Aryan-looking fellow had served on the other side.
You could conceivably.
Conceivably, but we don't know.
Right.
And neither did Phil. But Phil assumed somehow took a dislike to this guy. He saw him with a very pretty. He was with a very pretty woman, and Phil didn't like that idea, or it got in Phil's craw, as you might say. So Ben says Phil starts antagonizing the guy, and going, "You Nazi bastard," blah blah blah. He's like calling him names and like, "Where were you during the war? You blah blah blah. I bet you put people in up." Like he's going way beyond as he could do.
Uh-huh.
And finally, the guy walks over to Phil and picks Phil up and belts him. And Phil then said it looked like a comedy because Phil literally slid down the wall.
Yeah, that makes sense. I never heard that story.
But now what Phil said is the classic thing. Ben says, "Come on, Phil, come on, you got to wake up. Let's go. I'll get you back to the hotel." This and that. He said, "Phil, I'm knocked out cold,
Yeah.
Finally, Phil opens his eyes and looks at Ben and says, "More wine, darling?"
More wine. It just says a little more Madeira, my dear. Like the folk song of the Limelighters. Have some Madeira, my dear. Yeah. He was. I thought he would say something like, "Did I win?" Or "You should see the other guy."
Yeah. He also had a great wit, though. Like when he was sober, when we did this alto summit, which, by the way, Vince Herring was on this. We did a 6 alto concert in Paris at La Villette, and we didn't all play 6 altos on every tune. We did 3 tunes.
Combination.
And there were individual features and duets and solos and blah blah blah. But we were trying to play. There was Phil, Jackie McLean, Frank Morgan, C Sharp, Clarence Sharp, who I got on the concert, Vince Herring, and myself. We were the 6 altos.
Nice.
So we're at rehearsal, and we're all going to play. We're rehearsing the tunes that we play together, which were going to be Donna Lee, Confirmation, and Sure Enough. So we're all together there and trying to play and playing Donna Lee. So we all play the head together, the 6 altos. And of course, there's 6 different ways of 8 notes going on.
Of course.
And not very much of a blend. In fact, it's a train wreck. We sit there at rehearsal and it's, like all these different concepts of time. And, by the second time we ran through it, it sounded very good. Everybody had adjusted, but first time, disaster. So Phil quietly takes his horn out of his mouth. He sits there and gets the reflective look, puts his hands on his chin. And it was a tribute to Charlie Parker.
Sure.
They called it that. So he goes, "Flame keepers, yes. Timekeepers,
Yeah, well, he was very witty and was a good writer, a very good, very smart guy.
Yeah, he turned me on to one thing. I studied with him when I was 15. He heard me and gave me a scholarship to his camp in New Hope, Ramblerny.
I know about that.
And but one thing that he stressed to us, which I thought was wonderful, was he got us into poetry and
Yeah.
films. He turned out to Dylan Thomas. And, just as a musician, you shouldn't limit yourself to only knowing about music. It was important that we know about a lot of things. Politics, Phil was a wonderfully militant uh, political force. He really, I thought, was a wonderful, his political opinions were very,
Well, it was the 60s.
yeah, the 60s.
Everybody was into it, man. It was a very interesting time.
And in general, as your sister described him once as, I love that statement. She said, Phil is a very angry man, but he's angry about all the right things.
That's true. But sometime in the later years, he would get exercised and angry about stuff that didn't happen. He would hear something wrong, somebody would strike him wrong or something, but, and he'd get real, bugged with it and start taking actions on it. And mostly they were just things that he got confused about. But, this happens to us when we get older.
Some of it is the emphysema too, that sometimes I have emphysema.
Yeah.
And there are moments where you just feel so rotten.
Oh, I know.
To take it out on somebody. I resist that, but
yeah, well, it's a good idea to resist it, but he wasn't that guy. But he did as well as he could. He stayed out there. But when he retired at Manchester Craftsmen's Guild after a Bird with Strings concert in Pittsburgh. He came out and
on the bandstand.
He came to the bandstand and announced that this would be his last gig. He was retiring from playing the saxophone. And he hadn't told anybody, including Jill. He just went out on stage and announced it. And then and he came back home and immediately had to go in the hospital because he had pneumonia. And he got out and he was in a rehab and he got mistreated in the rehab and to go back to the hospital and back to the rehab. And finally, after about the third round, he's going like, he called his doctor. He says, so what happens if I, decide I just want to stop using the oxygen? He said, well, you'll be dead in a couple of days. He says, yeah, that's what I want to do. And he checked into the hospital and that's what he did. He had everybody coming to hang and, his kids, friends. A hotel room would be like, you have 20 people in it, 25 people.
Hospital room, yeah.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, he pulled the plug.
Now, is that in Pennsylvania? Isn't there some kind of thing where that's a legal thing to do?
Well, it was done in a hospital with nurses and a doctor, so I'm sure it was legal.
So you can choose.
It was his choice, but it wasn't like they gave him a hot shot or anything. They just let him take his nose piece out.
I always wondered about those.
Without the oxygen, he couldn't survive.
Yeah, I mean, I was in rehab. I spent 4 months in the hospital a couple of years ago, in I think 2021, and I did 2 months in intensive care and 2 months in rehab.
Bob, I didn't know that it's intensive care, but I know you had the COPD.
Yeah, I almost died, actually. I was in a coma for a bit. And the thing that kept me sane, well, as sane as I can be, was, show you the book. I practiced in my head.
Yeah.
And I ended up, when I got out of the hospital, writing down a lot of the conundrums I was going through, intervallic exercises, stuff like that. And I came up with this book, The Bob Mover Lexicon, which Chuck Scher just published.
Well, from your coma dreams, or just from laying around in the hospital?
From trying not to go nuts. I would sit there, I'd go through 12 keys.
But when you were in a coma, do you know what was going on?
I was in a coma, and then the medicine they gave me, there were some weird hallucinations.
Were you having dreams and hallucinations?
Yeah, especially when I came out of the coma, I was convinced that I was prisoner on some remote island by a tribe of Amazons, especially.
That's pretty good.
Amazon women, all the nurses. And my wife was conspiring. She was the chief against them. Mm-hmm. The chief one is conspiring against me.
That's a good one.
Yeah, this was, and that kind of, finally I had to escape. I said, I've got to get back to New York. I've got to get back. How am I going to go back? Because they've taken all my money. I can't get a flight. And I sat there and the doctor said, put your foot on the floor. You're in New York. You're in the hospital.
Right,
I
look
said,
out the window.
how do I know that? This is not, I had some weird hallucinations. Let's just say the drugs they give you are weird, but the rehab, was terrible.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh, they put in these rehabs, but the quality of nurses, besides, like in New York Presbyterian, the care was wonderful. Intensive care was, the nurses were on it, even at night. There were good people. The rehab, there were a couple of good people, of course, there are everywhere, but a lot of the nurses at night were really, really mistreating.
Yeah. Well, Phil was mistreated. He finally, they reported it, and I think the person lost her job because she was kind of abusing Phil.
Yeah, well, they put you in this ventilator, and when you fill up with phlegm and everything, and you need to be suctioned.
Yeah.
If they don't do it, you really feel like you're choking to death.
Yeah.
While you're there, and
terrible.
One nurse who seemed to enjoy
watching you suffer.
Yeah, to watching this state. I reported her too. I don't know what happened to her, but I made sure that I don't like to report anybody. I know the job is hard, but this one was,
Well, if you're not getting the care that you need and you're supposed to have, man,
Yeah. Anyway, let's go back to.
Let's. Where should we go? Could we go on and on about Phil Woods, man? That's like
your childhood. I think it's fascinating to
my
me.
childhood.
That
hasn't ended.
George and Gracie, and George Burns and Gracie Allen. I have to say that because there's a whole generation that watches us who don't have any idea maybe who they are. But
well, those who do.
Those who do.
There's a lot of a lot of my musician friends seem to follow old time radio, and not all of them, but guys who are probably like your age in your 60s or early 70s have been following it forever. I've followed it, of course, because I grew up with it. I grew up with radio. My dad was on the radio. We didn't have TV till I was 10, and nobody did really. Essentially, it was just not in the home.
Well, your dad was quite a famous radio announcer.
Yeah, he was very well known. He was like a second banana radio announcer, pitch man, straight man.
He was also in some movies I was reading, like the Jolson Story.
Yeah, he's in both of those.
Which means that maybe you even knew Keith Brazell personally.
No, I was too young. Jolson Stories were done in the 40s, I think. And I was born in 42. And Dad was working with Burns and Allen before I was born. And was in radio and was very well known. It was making movies under contract to Warner Brothers. He made a lot of movies, and even was the lead actor in a couple of B movies, which were basically like horror mystery movies.
Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, well, they're pretty bad, but they're a lot of fun.
Unfortunately, he passed away right as you got your union card.
Right before, about a year before, yeah.
Started to, so he never really
got. He heard me. Well, he did hear me play, because there was a place across the street. It was like a hotel, and they had a lounge, and they used to have musicians come down from New York mostly to stay for the weekend, and then they'd have like a jam session in We were in Palm Springs, California, and there were a couple of places that they had jam sessions, and you could get to play with these guys who were really guys from LA, good musicians. And
no, I was two children. Were there other siblings, or you and your sister?
No, I was 3 sisters: Jill, Lynn, and Sarah.
And where were you in the placement of the family? Where were you?
I'm the second born.
Second born. And you were there other? I guess your dad was musical to some extent, but
he loved music. But my mom was a professional dancer, and was in films also until she retired and got married, and started having kids. She was in movies from the 30s. She was a Goldwyn girl, and she was in the chorus of a lot of movies. And you can look her up too. She has a more limited curriculum vitae, but but she was a really good dancer, and she had great rhythm and great musical taste, and she had a very broad musical taste. And my dad was more of a jazz and swing guy. Well, my mom loved classical music, Broadway shows. So, we grew up with that. I mean, my sister Jill and I used to sing, the whole show of Oklahoma, like just, and, we had a piano. Everybody had to take lessons. Jill was very good. And she also played in orchestra in junior high and high school. And then she just didn't want to do it. She wanted to, work on her car and hang out with the guys.
Really?
Oh, yeah. She was a greaseball, man. Something else, man. I mean, Jill and I couldn't get along at all until we discovered ourselves in a den of iniquity together, and we bonded. Because as kids, we never got along.
That's funny how that was.
It is, because she's my favorite person.
Yeah. My sister Joy and I actually did. We used to do Peter Pan for the neighbors.
Oh, yeah?
Parts, the Mary Martin.
I won't grow up. I don't want to go to school. Well, you know who wrote that? Bill Charlap's father. Bill Charlap's father.
Moose Charlap, yes.
Yeah, Moose.
And yeah, well, we would do I'm Flying, the whole tour. And and then we went from there to Lambert, Hendrickson, Ross.
Oh, yeah.
And then we sang all the tunes on The Connection of Freddie Red with
okay, no kidding.
And my sister still sings that stuff. She does. She's quite talented. She never had any commercial success, unfortunately, but she's done some, some recordings that are really nice.
Okay.
Sullivan
and
her music, writes her own tunes. But anyway, she and we bonded in Dens of Iniquity as well.
Good place to bond.
Yeah, the bond was.
So so that was the family structure. We were all very close together. I think Mom had 4 kids in 7.5 years. And she didn't work anymore, but occasionally she'd put on her. She was a Spanish dance specialist, and occasionally she'd put on a record and come out of the den in her first Spanish outfit with her castanets.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, man, she was something else. She was really good. And she taught us all to dance. Yeah, like the Bullerias. But she taught us all to dance and took us to movies, took us to sporting events, took us to shows, So Dad was always working, but then when I got into jazz, he started taking me out when I was about 12. Started taking me out to clubs when he could. I remember him taking me to see Dave Brubeck's quartet, original quartet, because I was very fond of Brubeck. My parents didn't think Brubeck was all that, but they understood that I was important to me. So he took me to see Dave live, and Buddy DeFranco was also on the show. Was at the Zardes in Hollywood. And then about 6 months later, took me to see Woody Herman at Jazz City, which was his 8-piece band. They called it Jackpot, because he had put it together. They broke up the big band for a while and put a small band together for Vegas.
I see.
And a great band, Chuck Flores, Monty Budwig, Dick Collins, Richie Kamuka, Cy Tuff. And of course, Dad and Woody knew each other because they'd worked together on radio. So he worked with a lot of bands. He did band remotes as well. I mean, he knew all the musicians, all the band leaders, and they all knew him and met so many people, after he left. Well, during his lifetime, of course, but I was a kid. And then after he split, then, there's some of his closer friends became my friends,
I see. Now, when did you decide on the drums, and did you ever consider, as soon as you played the drums, did you feel that this was going to be your life, or did you think about other possibilities, careers?
Well, I wanted to be a tenor player. And I did play. I played all through junior high and high school. But I was sad, SAD.
Really?
And I couldn't play. I wanted to play like Prez. And, like Secretary of the Interior, it was no good. But I could play. I could read music and I could play in a band. I played in the marching band, the concert band. And I also would play percussion sometimes, because if it was a difficult part, most of the drummers couldn't read much. So I would go back, because I had studied piano and saxophone and I could read rhythms, I'd go back and teach them the parts. And I think my last year in junior high, I told the teacher, I just want to stay back here with the percussion. He said, that's okay. It was a huge, concert band, really, like 80 people or something.
So you got to play timpanis and things like that.
Yeah, mostly snare drum. But I did learn to play some timpani, some bells, and small percussion. The snare drum is the thing, man. You got to get some ability on the snare drum, and then you can play. If you can hear something to play. So I started hearing it around 11, 12, but I was concentrating on the saxophone, and it's just such a lazy practicer, and I didn't really have I had the desire, but not the gift, and the desire wasn't that strong. I'd rather be, out playing baseball. But I had a really good saxophone teacher who had taught a lot of famous people, and he took the gig because even though I was a terrible student, after the lessons, he would drink scotch with my parents, and he would get loaded. I lost him as a teacher when my mom was there. My dad was working, and Frank Chase was his name, and Frank had a couple of drinks and crawled across the living room and bit my mother on the leg. She was a dancer. She had fantastic legs. And that was the end of my lessons. But I kept playing.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, too bad. Anyway, so I started getting out, and I got my dad to take me to the Lighthouse, because I'd become a big fan of the Lighthouse All-Stars of that time. So
right,
this is now in the 50s.
To explain to people, there's a bass player, Howard Rumsey.
Yeah, Howard Rumsey.
And the Lighthouse All-Stars were, well, go ahead.
At that time was Shelly Manne, Shorty Rogers, Jimmy Giuffre, piano player. It's a guy who I never heard much of after that, named Frank Patchen. And they were making records. They started making records, 78 records. We're still listening to 78s. These singles of some of their stuff. They did like R&B parodies. That was one thing they did. They just have like honking tenor saxes. Like Little
Richard records.
Was a Big J McNeely.
Right.
The two guys very well known in LA, Mighty Joe Young and Jay McNeely. And they there was a TV event once where they had a boxing match, except the two of them in boxing gear with their tenors. And then Johnny Otis had a great TV show. Johnny Otis, the rhythm and blues drummer and vibist and composer and band leader, had a wonderful band, and he was on every week. As anything that was on TV at that point, or the radio, I was eating up. I never stopped listening. And then we had the record collection. I think my dad was very influential, but he was working all the time, and he loved the music, though. So when he heard me play, before he died, about a year before, I was playing across the street from where we lived in Palm Springs in this hotel, sitting in with the band. And I see my dad coming in the place, standing in the back, right? And we finished this tune, and I thought it sounded fairly good. I didn't know how to play. I could always hear music, but I had no drum ability, but I could play, and I had talent. So people liked me, they let me play. Anyway, so the dad walks over to me, and I say, "You're going to tell me, hey, Billy, you don't sound too bad." He walks up to me and says, "Hey, Dad, what's happening?" He goes, whispers in my ear, says, "More bass drum." And I was like, "Ah, shit," He was right, by the way. It'd be 10 years to figure it out.
That's funny. You were in LA. You got your union card, so you were about 17 years old.
Yeah, after Dad died, I was 16, and then the end of that year, September, we moved back to Los Angeles after Dad passed away, the end of the summer.
So now Los Angeles, that scene was thriving at the time. I mean, I'm thinking
Yeah.
The Kenton band was at its height, but I mean, to the
Yeah.
individuals who were part of that band, I
Yeah. Well,
mean,
most of
it's
them were part of that West Coast jazz movement already from like 52, 53. By the time I started really listening seriously, the folks had all the Kenton records, so I loved those. I loved all those guys, and I loved Dave Pell Octet and Shorty Rogers and the Giants and the Lighthouse All Stars, and all of them. Man, I was a total West Coast jazz nut, and I had heard some more harder stuff, but I hadn't really checked it out. I liked Clifford and Max's band. I started collecting records and listening to the radio all the time. There were a couple of radio shows you could listen to. There was a AM radio show. You could listen to jazz all day long. And I used to listen on my day job and practice at the practice pad. I was a parking lot attendant at NBC in Hollywood.
oh,
And I would practice on my practice pad, listen to the DJ Tommy B. And he'd start off his show with ba ba da 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 da do da blah blah da. Springsville from Miles Ahead.
right, yes.
That was his opening theme, and then he would play all the records, and you just you'd be soaking it up. And at NBC, they would be doing transcriptions. I met some musicians who were working there, and they befriended me, several of them. Red Mitchell being a special example, who befriended me by the time I was 17, and we literally started hanging out. It was it's a great friend to me.
Red was a wonderful guy.
Great guy, a great player, just a great person to be around.
Yeah, great spirit.
Yep.
Very.
Yeah, so that was good. I had a day job, and then I was practicing, trying to get. But I already started playing right before I was 17, I think, or right after I turned 17. Started playing with Charles Lloyd, and that happened because my sister Jill, my now favorite person, she always dated musicians, so she was actually dating Charlie Hayden, and then they were just kids, man. They were like 18, 19 years old.
So you met Charlie at that age.
Oh, I know Charlie forever. Yeah, I knew Charlie forever. But Charlie introduced, he wasn't really into it, I don't think. But they were hanging out, and then
Well,
Charlie.
wasn't his family a country band? Didn't he come from a family and even play on the radio with?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, you know all of that. But in the LA scene, he was, a really good bass player, but it was controversial because he played with Ornette for one thing, and then, everybody liked his playing. He had a great beat, but he played very simplistic. Doon doon ding ding doon doon ding ding doon doon ding 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 doon doon. And some of the older guys used to make fun of him. Dexter Gordon, for example.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Charlie Hayden, why do you play two of the same notes all the time? Yeah, Dexter was around, and I was playing with Charles. Well, anyway, I met Terry Trotter, the pianist who was ended up being Jill's first husband. So Terry kind of adopted me, told all of his friends about me, and I started playing with his friends. His best friends were Bobby Hutcherson and Herbie Lewis.
Oh yeah.
And Charles Lloyd was a couple of years older. He was in college. But I seen Charles recently. I said, "Man, you were like the older guy. Like we really looked up to you." He said, "Shit, man, I'm only like 2 years older than you." But he had a car, sports car. He had a wife. He had like nice clothes.
Oh, Lloyd.
He played alto. He played really good, man. He was a very exciting player, very hot player. So the band I played his first, used to go to his gig and sit in, and eventually he hired me. And it was a coffee house in Pasadena, California. And it was me and Herbie and Bobby, Terry, and Charles. And we played. I could always play good with them. And then Bobby stuck around for quite a while. Herbie went with Les McCann. So we got another bass player, Bobby West, very nice bass player. And it continued on. Terry had other things to do. So it was mostly a quartet. And then we got a gig that I needed to be in the union for. So I got my union card to do this gig with Charles.
And Charles was only playing alto at this point?
He was playing alto and flute.
Right, but no tenor yet. Huh.
He switched to tenor after he went to New York with Chico Hamilton. He was playing alto with Chico and flute. And he went to New York. He came back and said, I'm playing tenor now. I said, really? What about the alto? I said, no, that's not the New York horn. You got to play tenor. He said, the New York stick.
The New York
Got to
stick.
play the New York stick.
I heard he had his, Ron McClure was saying that Charles had his own language like Lester Young.
He did in a way. Yeah, Charles was quite the operator. I had a long friendship with him, and it was in abeyance for about 25 years. I didn't speak to him for 25 years, but then we made up a few years ago. So it was mostly him, just, he was not cool. Well, people will tell you, he could be, I don't know, man. I always loved his playing, and I always loved him. But, it doesn't mean I want to talk to him.
I have friends like that too.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, you know each other for so long. We just had a online, spoke a little bit in email because the aforementioned Terry Trotter is not feeling well, and I wanted Charles to know so he would call him up and cheer Terry up. Because Terry and I were, I mean, our teenage jazz scene in LA, man, and then there were all the great older players. The young guys aspired to, well, we played together, we had a ball, and we had groups and we had gigs and stuff. But you wanted to go, there was a jam session where you could play with Dexter. And you go to that session and get to play with Dexter. Yeah, and Herbie Lewis was usually on the gigs, and Herbie was my best pal. And he would just tell people, get Bill up here. He plays better than that guy. I was like, shut up, man. We hung out, he and Herbie and,
Harold Land and Teddy Edwards, just thinking about.
Yeah, well, Teddy those guys are like the big, Dexter, they're the big daddies. Teddy was very friendly to the younger musicians. And he's hiring Terry when Terry Trotter was still like 18 or something. He played really good, man, even as a 16, 17-year-old. He incredibly good player.
What happened to him?
He got into more commercial music, a lot of accompaniment. He was accompanied many, many singers. He was with Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet for a couple of decades.
I see. That's
Natalie Cole for another 15 years. And in between, he played with Sinatra. I played with Tony Bennett. This recording. Yeah, it's a hell of a player, great accompanist. But he could always, he just stopped playing jazz. And then the last few years, he was playing more. He moved up to Nevada with his wife. She retired, and they moved up to near Vegas. And he said not playing anymore.
Oh.
But yeah, hell of a player. Man, Bobby Hutcherson said Terry taught him how to play. And those guys were like 18 years old when I was 17, and we were friends. We were like the unholy four, like a lot of fun. Harold was cool. Harold was a kind of remote character, he was very quiet. He's not stuck up, but he has a regal quality about him where you don't feel like you're going to really connect with him. But I knew him, and later years I would see him. Say, Harold, it's me, Bill Goodwin. You probably don't remember me. And he'd go like, Bill, I just saw you last year. Of course I remember you. I'd usually be drunk or something, So I'm sorry, Harold, I'm unworthy. But Billy Higgins was around. There are a lot of good drummers around. Dan Levy, Shelley Man, Billy Higgins, Frank Butler.
They're all on my list. These are the guys.
Oh my God. It was so rich, man. And Stan Levy and Mel Lewis and, Lawrence Marable.
What was Stan Levy like?
It was like it's like my uncle. He and Shelley and Mel were like my three Jewish uncles. They'd loan me drums. They'd give me advice. Stan actually threatened me into being a better drummer.
Stan?
Stan Levy.
But he's a boxer, right?
6'3", ex-boxer, you know, big shoulders, man. And his face, like, he could look at you as like a brute face, just like a stone face. And we were talking one time, he had heard me play. I said, Bill, you have a lot of talent. You have musical talent. You could be a really good drummer, but you got to get your hands together. My hands weren't good. You know, I could play music, but I didn't know how to play the drums. So the way he said it was subtext, or I'll kill you. He's looking at me like these black eyes, like, or I'll kill you.
Yeah.
Okay, Stan. That's what I got the practice pad. I'm practicing every day on my day job.
Somebody once said that he used to brag about being the only guy that owed money to Charlie Parker.
Yeah. Yeah. They were very close. They actually lived together at one time. I think Bird got him strung out originally. They still, and Stan's wife, Angela, who's still alive, she still talks about him sort of fondly. She calls him Charles.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Charles tried to sell Stanley's drums, you know, and I prevented it. She's a hoot. Those people, like, you know, I had no father at that point, and I was just hanging out in jazz clubs, and I wanted to be everywhere and know everybody. And I already knew some people, and I knew Howard Rumsey, and I had met Stan and Conti Condoli and Bob Cooper and, you know, Frank Rosalino and all those guys. You know, when my dad took me to see at the Lighthouse, we went on a Sunday afternoon. They used to have a matinee, and then they had an evening performance. There was like 5 hours in the afternoon, 5 hours at night. And you could go in the afternoon and then have some dinner and stay over and hear the night. And we used to do that, my high school friends and I. And my dad might take me one afternoon. Les McCann was often the intermission act before he was well known. And so they seated us. The band was playing. First thing that happens is that the band's playing. Bob Cooper is married to June Christy. So June was there. She sees Dad, and they had worked together. She comes over, sits at our table. And I meet June Christy, who I love.
That's the next person on my list here.
Yeah, June. Well, I ended up working with June a little bit, not a lot. But in any case, Coop comes over then after that. And it's like all these musicians knew my dad, you know. He was on the radio. They worked with him on the radio, or, you know, they knew him from hanging out in the jazz clubs and be out in the alley smoking that reefer. He loved that.
Did your dad like to smoke reefer?
Oh, yeah. I didn't know until he was gone, but then I found out from like I mentioned, his adult friends. His friends became my friends, and they told me all about him. I really got to know him much better after he died.
Because, you know, Chet Baker told me that June Christy was the one that really encouraged him to sing.
Oh, no kidding.
And he had sung at a couple of sessions.
Yeah.
And June heard him, and she said, you know, Chet, you ought to cultivate that.
Yeah, I can believe that.
He was just doing it as a lark and something he did sometimes.
Such a natural man. I mean, I played with Chet during my time in LA in the 60s. He was there, home for a while, at least a year maybe, and I actually played gigs with him, with Bob Whitlock, the bass player, with the very first bass player, I think, with Jerry Mulligan, first or second bass player with the Mulligan Quartet. And and Terry Trotter on piano. And Chet was really, he liked me and I liked him. I loved playing with him.
Yeah, he spoke highly of you, actually.
Oh, that's nice.
You know, because I would go hear you guys when I was with Chet too, and
yeah,
say Bill Goodwin, great guy, and he spoke. Now Chet and Bob Whitlock were sort of a funny team because they were literally partners in crime.
Indeed. Well, everybody who could be was a partner in crime if Chet knew him.
Yeah,
and I knew a lot of those people, and I was friends with a lot of the people, though I was not a heroin user. Well, I mean, I would use, but I'd never inject.
Yeah,
I would occasionally snort.
Yeah. Did you know, by the way, did you know young Scott LaFaro at all?
I met Scott, but it was after he had gone. He was already well known. My young friends, like Charles and Terry, they played with Scott. They knew Scott very well. And in fact, Charles had a group with Don Cherry, Terry Trotter, Scott LaFaro, and Billy Higgins. And there's a tape somewhere of them playing. They're playing all like Bird, Clacto Sedstein and all the tunes like that.
Yeah, there's a tape of Ornette with that group. I mean,
yeah, it's Ornette's group, essentially.
Yeah, well, that's with Ornette, and actually Paul Bley was on that.
Uh-huh.
That was the
Bley. Well, that was Charlie Hayden. Well, Bley hired, he had a steady gig at a club in LA. This is before my time, but just before. And he hired Ornette's whole band and got fired in 2 weeks,
Right.
He did. But he had a great band before that. He had Lenny McBrown and Charlie Hayden and Dave Pike on vibes, who's a wonderful vibes player.
Lenny McBrown. What happened to Lenny McBrown?
Well, he came back to New York, and I met Lenny a lot when I was a kid. I saw him play a lot. Very beautiful player. There's also a drummer from the East Coast, Ron Jefferson, who ended up playing with Les McCann. And I see those guys play all the time. They became friends of mine.
Sonny Rollins once told me that one of his favorite trios that he'd ever had, we were talking about things that didn't get recorded once. And he said he took a trio to Vancouver. I think they played the Cellar, the original Cellar in Vancouver. And his trio was Scott LaFaro and Lenny McBrown.
Nice. Yeah.
And there's no...
Everybody loves Scott, man. He just, played so beautifully. It was like the avatar of the new, of just a great bass player. Ray Brown was a huge fan of Scott's and would tell everybody about him. So you got to hear this kid, his kid's like the total shit over here.
And there were other people. Hampton Hawes, did you?
I knew Hampton, yeah. I knew Hampton. I played with him later on. I played with him in New York, but I knew him for years. And I knew Frank Butler for years, and that crowd. The great players, Dexter, of course, and Teddy, Hampton. There's a great piano player there. It's originally from Chicago, named John Huston, who I love to play with and played with quite a bit. I played with essentially everybody in LA, pretty much.
Joe Maney.
Oh yeah, I played with Joe. I knew Joe. Like a nut.
Yeah.
He killed himself for a joke.
Right, that's a story. They said it would be Russian roulette, but I never really understood that.
It wasn't Russian roulette. He was at this alto player's house. He was hanging out. It was like kind of a weird menage a trois with this alto player, Ray Graziano, and his wife. And they're high, and they're kidding around, and he had a little 22. Ray had a little 22 on the dresser. And Joe picks it and goes like, "This isn't loaded, is it?" Sticks it in his mouth and pulls the trigger. That's it. That's the whole story. But I played with Joe, and I played with he and Jack Sheldon together. They had a rehearsal band, and I used Mel Lewis was the drummer, and Mel would send me into sub, really the worst big band drummer ever at that time. But I said, "How come you guys want me?" He said, "Well, Mel would say, Joe and Jack want you to sub." It's okay. It's like 19 years old or whatever. And so I asked them finally, I said, "You guys, how come you like me to come and rehearse you? I can't really play your music." They said, "We know, Bill, but you're such a good laugher." They did a lot of comedy. And this is in a rehearsal room, doing comedy. This is like on a gig doing a comedy bit with a big band. It was like the best musicians in LA, all-star big band with me on drums. It's like it was like a Terry Gibbs dream band, essentially.
Oh,
well, the same guys. And it was a lot of fun. They were so nuts.
Hilarious. I mean, he was and
Joe could really play, man. The great lead alto players, and could really play good jazz too.
Yeah,
marvelous player.
Was Lenny Bruce hanging around at that time too?
I met Lenny when I was 19. I played with Terry Gibbs Quartet at the club called the Crescendo in Hollywood. And he was the star, and we were the opening band. We played, and then we accompanied Ann Richards, who's a singer who had been married to Stan Kenton. So we did our bit, and we played with Ann, and then Lenny came on and did his hour. So I played with him for 2 weeks, every night, and I got to know him a little bit. So wrap my drums up in the mic cord every show, like the last show. And then the sound man would have to come in early and unwrap my drums so I could play the first set. But we hit it off, man. It was very easy cat to hang with, you know. We knew a lot of mutual friends together, like Red Mitchell and Leroy Vinegar, and his pals with Philly Joe Jones, and very, very nice guy, very entertaining. I loved his work.
Yeah, me too. It was I got to know Kitty pretty well. His daughter.
Really? His daughter? Uh-huh.
We used to hang out a lot in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
One time she said she was going to adopt. The humor of the apple didn't fall far from the tree sometimes. Yeah. She said, I want to adopt a puppy. And I said, Kitty, you can barely take care of yourself. You sure you can handle a dog? I thought it might not be a good idea. But she said, will you go with me and help me choose a puppy? I want to go to do a rescue puppy, the ASPCA. I said, well, yeah, I'll come down with you. Sure, we can pick one out. And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know, because she had her own troubles at the time.
Oh, yeah.
But I think she did it because she didn't end up taking the puppy. But I think she wanted to do what she ended up doing. And I think the whole expedition was about this one-liner. We're in the line with the little dog, very adorable little puppy. And then she says in a stage whisper, little do they know, we plan to dissect him.
Oh, God. Thank you very much. My name is Count Alucard. I am the beam-up vampire. That's Philly Joe.
Yes.
Well, I also have a Dracula fixation, so, I wouldn't do that in front of Lenny, but I've done it for a lot of people. Good evening. Good evening, and how are you, my friend? Welcome to Transylvania. Juba, bring me my works. That's Philly Joe. There's a whole underground tape of him doing Dracula as a junkie.
For Dracula, right?
Bela Lugosi was a junkie. So, perfect.
Yeah, and
he was, he's my idol. I would say as important to me at one time as any musician. The way he rocked, man, was his timing, his subjects.
Philly Joe.
He was so on top of it, man. And I can, I'll tell you, that's where I first met Miles Davis, because Terry Gibbs introduced him to me backstage at that gig. He was there to see Lenny like 5 or 6 times. And I met Miles first time, and Terry called the next night, says, ask Miles how he liked your playing. How do you like my new drummer, Bill Goodwin? He's only 19 years old. I said, yeah, he's okay. He plays too loud. And then there's other things that happened after that with him. He used to fuck with me, Another time I was playing with Leroy Vinegar, and Leroy went to talk to Miles, and he came back. He knew this story. So he came back, and he was grinning, right? Leroy says, what's so funny? I just asked Miles how he liked your playing in the trio. He said, he's good, but he plays too soft. Anyway, it goes on from there. So I never really got to know him, but I was around him quite a bit. We didn't get to know him to sit down and bullshit. So we probably would have got, he was very shy, I think. I think we would have gotten along okay.
Yeah, Walter Davis Jr. would tell me that, he said, oh, Miles, what I like to do with Miles is he come up and he like attacks me out of nowhere and I spin him around. Yeah.
We used to go to Stan Levy's house when he was in LA and spar with Stan. Miles was by today when we wanted to spar. I said, oh my God, really? I said, yeah, I didn't hurt him too bad.
Right.
Don't hit him in the mouth or anything. He probably outweighed him by like 80 pounds or something.
And of course, you knew Art Pepper out there.
Oh, very well. I played with Art. It was one of my first kind of international achievements was being seen on Jazz Casual with Art Pepper. That really got around, man. When I first started traveling, a lot of people had seen that show. You know, it was Ralph J. Gleason on what they called educational television.
Ralph Gleason show.
Huh?
Was Ralph Gleason's Jazz Casual?
Yeah, Ralph Gleason's Jazz Casual.
I remember seeing that, and I say that was so strange because I had only known early Art Pepper, where he's playing more like Zoot, and on that particular show, he was playing more like trying to get into Coltrane.
Well, not really.
I
He loved Coltrane. He wanted the model of. He wasn't trying to play like Train.
Well, he was trying.
He was trying to play in that. I would be more akin to Jackie McLean, I would say.
Yeah, I would
taking
say
those forms to open up the music and So he was listening to Train. He was listening to Ornette, and Art was a very original cat in his way. And you're right, he had a real connection to Zoot because they came up together on Central Avenue in L.A. They knew each other forever. They were like the talented teenage, O-phase on Central Avenue.
Right. That's the when you came up, Central Avenue was pretty much over.
Pretty much, it was gone completely. And after the Watts riots, there was nothing happening at all down there. There were a couple of clubs downtown, were kind of mixed, salt and pepper joints. Wasn't much going on. We hardly ever went, over, except for go to like the Hotel Watkins, was kind of a black hotel. There was a jam session on Monday night. Go to the It Club, which is sort of almost in the ghetto, and places that were, was a place called the Zebra Lounge. But, you could go there because, white musicians worked there with the black musicians, and mixed couples came in and stuff like that. So you could feel at home. That's where I first heard Coltrane, the Zebra Lounge with Terry Trotter. And he came out, and it's a noisy bar, man. It's not a, cathedral of, the Village Vanguard or something, which you didn't used to be such a cathedral either. Everything's like so quiet now, Anyway, the bar is just like the bar is good. The train starts playing, and people started quieting down a little bit, and then pretty soon, really getting into about the 8th or 9th minute of his solo on the blues. So people are now up from their bar stools and they're kind of moving around, and then he takes it to a peak, and people start testifying. Yeah. All right, yeah, Lord. All right. These are like, regular people. There's no preachers there, man, but it was a sermon he was giving. And they went nuts. And Terry and I, the two little white guys, were sitting there like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And it's magnificent. And then he finished and they calmed down. Then McCoy did the same thing. He did about 10 minutes. And he had him shouting, he had him screaming by the end of his solo too. And it was like, oh, okay, that's the way it is now. It was a marvelous man. But I had heard Train with Miles, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with it, and I had all his records. But I heard him live with Miles and Cannonball, Wynton and Paul and Jimmy. It was right after Kind of Blue came out.
Yeah.
1959.
Well, I noticed that black clubs in those days too, even Wally's in Boston, when you really started to play something, you'd have some people that would holler out. There was always a little bit. Yeah, tell me about it. Tell me.
Talk about your mama.
Yeah,
Phil used to yell that out.
Still love to yell.
Tell me about your mama.
Tell me about your mama.
So anyway, the LA scene, what you're touching on is that was very lucky guy. Even though my dad had died, he moved back into a great scene. I started making connections. Well, because of Jill and Terry, Bobby, Herbie, Dexter, Teddy, the list goes on and on and on. And I was out taking it all in. I was single. I had a job. I had money. I was single. I had friends. And we would do stuff. It mostly involved either trying to play, rehearse, learn music, or go to see other people play.
I was wondering.
I saw Scott LaFaro with Ornette.
I was going to say that you heard Scott with Ornette.
With Ornette, yeah.
How were people reacting to that at that time? Like this
sounded fine. Sounded great. Blackwell was playing drums. Can't go wrong with that guy.
No,
Ed Blackwell, man, was a great genius,
he
in my
was.
opinion. In my opinion, but a rare human being as well. But it sounded good. Nobody came. There were no people in the club at all.
That's what I was wondering about. Were there
Yeah,
people?
you know who was
Action?
there were the teenagers who loved Ornette. It was me and Jane Getz and Joanne Burkeen and Bobby Hutcherson and Herbie Lewis, you know. And we weren't old enough to get in the place, but they had a little restaurant thing in the back, and they'd let us sit in there and listen, and occasionally look out the door to see the band. And then on the breaks, there was nobody there, so the band would come in and hang with us, with the kids.
Which club was that?
That was called Digger, I think, the Digger.
Diggers. And so Ornette would just come, Don Cherry, they come and just sit in back and hang out with you guys?
What were they going to do? Well, they either did that or they went and got high, or I don't know where the fuck they did, but that's how I met Blackwell. I didn't really meet Scott, but you know, it didn't seem like weird at all that the cat, you know, at least some of the cats, we'd come in and say hi. I mean, Joanne knew Ornette and Don that played with them. You know, they sort of knew us, and in some cases had played with us. They knew Herbie.
Was Joanne with Charles at that time yet? Or
Yeah,
I was
they were
back
married right in high school.
right. So they were
I played with them when they were, let's say, like a year or two older than me, and I was still a teenager. We were going to their house, and the bass player, Hersh Hamill, was the bass player with Art Pepper's group. And we went over to Joanne and Charles to play some new music they'd written. And man, it was something else. I was so impressed with them.
Really?
Oh yeah. But there was a good quality of players in my age group was pretty great, man. I mean, there were all the older players, and then there was younger, like drummers that you never heard of, like Don Joham and Nick Martinez and you know, Mike Romero, and I'm searching now, but there were a bunch.
I still don't know.
Will Bradley Jr.
Wow.
You know, yeah, really so great players, and most of them friends of mine, or at least well acquainted, because we used to do a lot of hanging out and a lot of club hopping, and then started gigging a lot. So, you know, you just get to know people, and I was determined to know everybody I needed to know, and to learn every music that I might need to know. So I was memorizing Horace Silver arrangements and Bud Powell tunes, Charlie Parker tunes, you know, especially Bud and Horace, and but I was listening to, you know, the music of the day and was just soaking it up. I have a very let's say a very good musical memory.
Yeah.
I can't remember where I put my glasses.
But you can remember tunes you played 25 years ago, right?
Oh, even further back than that. I can remember what it felt like to be sitting there hearing Coltrane live, you know, with the quartet for the first time.
Yeah, we're funny that
so
way.
Close, man. I was like, woo!
I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I'll remember.
Exactly.